Is Canada about to have a civil war? Because at least two provinces in Canada have seriously considered separation: the predominantly French Quebec and the resource-rich and very conservative Alberta. The difference is that while Quebec would almost certainly suffer economically from such a separation, Alberta would quickly become one of the wealthiest countries in the Western Hemisphere. And while separatist inclinations in Quebec seem to have dissipated as of late, they seem to gradually be growing stronger in Alberta. But why? Well, it might have something to do with the concept called equalization, because Section 36 of the Constitution Act of 1982 commits to promoting equal opportunities and reducing economic inequalities across regions. So, what does that mean practically? Well, essentially it means unconditional cash transfers from the federal government to provinces with, quote, lower fiscal capability, meaning they have less ability to generate revenue through taxes due to weaker economies or a smaller tax base. Okay, so what exactly does that look like? Well, here's a map of Canadian provinces by population. And just for fun, here's a map based on how people voted in the last election. And finally, here's a map of how equalization payments work out between the provinces. Right, so if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like equalization is Western conservative Canada sending a bunch of money to Eastern liberal Canada. And out of all of those conservative provinces, Alberta is both the most conservative and forced to send the most money per capita. Here's a quick breakdown of Alberta. Alberta's nominal GDP was approximately $350 billion, accounting for about 15% of Canada's total GDP, despite only having 11.6% of the national population. Alberta holds about 80% of Canada's oil production, a growing tech sector, and has experienced the highest growth in Canada. In short, Canada seems to need Alberta a lot more than Alberta seems to need Canada. Furthermore, the Supreme Court of Canada has provided a roadmap for legal separation back in 1998, which includes 6 steps. 1, the province has to decide to hold an independence referendum. 2, they have to decide on a referendum question to ask the population, and the question needs to be clear. 3, conduct the campaign, hold the referendum, and tally the votes. 4, and this is where it gets a little interesting, the House of Commons will decide if the majority vote in favor of separation is a, quote, clear expression of the will of Albertans to leave Canada, which is a kind of interesting requirement, allowing the federal government, which is most likely opposed to separation, to decide if the majority vote for separation is really a majority vote for separation. Then, of course, we move on to step 5, which is Alberta, the federal government, and the other provincial governments will engage in negotiations to change the Constitution. I'm sure that's not a significant hurdle. And then finally, step 6. If negotiations are successful, then a constitutional amendment will be enacted and Alberta will gain independence. So let's go ahead and sum this up. The process for separation includes multiple subjective criteria whereby Canadians who don't live in Alberta and who benefit directly from the equalization payments Alberta is forced to pay can thwart Alberta's desire to peacefully separate from Canada. So with those sort of hurdles, it's fair to ask, could Canada potentially have a civil war? Probably not. But there is a growing section of Alberta, and in fact, most of Western Canada, that is very clearly fed up with being a tax farm for other areas of Canada that don't seem to share their politics, culture, or productive capacity.